On the morning of October 13th, 1899, the people of Selkirk, Montana, woke to a silence that felt wrong in ways no one could immediately explain. In the Thornfield home, 7 beds lay untouched, their blankets folded tight with the same severe care they had shown the night before. The rooms were orderly, composed, and lifeless, like chambers prepared for the dead rather than for sleep. Gabriel Thornfield's 7 daughters had vanished without a sound, without a trace, without leaving even a single footprint on the thin frost clinging to the window ledges. No glass was broken, no locks were forced. The doors were sealed as they always were. Most unsettling of all, the sisters' nightgowns hung precisely where they had been placed before bed, unmoved, as if the girls had never returned to claim them. It was as though they had been erased in the night, not taken, but removed from the world entirely. The sheriff's report, sealed by federal order for nearly 80 years, contained a detail never spoken aloud in Selkirk, not even to Gabriel himself. Each bedroom showed signs of careful inspection by someone who knew the house well. Drawers opened and closed, papers handled, personal effects examined, and yet nothing was missing. Not jewelry, not clothing, not money. The house had been searched with intention, not theft. What happened to the 7 Thornfield sisters would become one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in American history, and the truth buried in government archives would reveal something far darker than a single family's tragedy. An intricate machinery of greed, corruption, and human trafficking that stretched far beyond that quiet Montana town. The investigation that followed would expose not just the fate of 7 young women, but a network of predators that had been feeding on frontier communities for decades. In the autumn of 1899, Selkirk stood at a crossroads between past and promise. Winds rolled down from the Bitterroot Mountains, carrying the scents of wood smoke, fallen leaves, and the faint metallic breath of silver ore. That ore had transformed Selkirk from an obscure settlement into one of the most prosperous towns between Denver and Seattle. With nearly 800 residents, Selkirk embodied the late-century American belief in progress and reinvention. Freight wagons rattled down Main Street toward the rail depot. Men in tailored coats stepped off trains from Chicago and New York. Families arrived with everything they owned, believing this place might finally reward their endurance. But prosperity brought fractures. Longtime settlers resented newcomers flush with Eastern capital. Miners risked their lives underground, while investors lived comfortably hundreds of miles away. And beneath it all ran quieter rumors. Young women leaving town for distant opportunities. Departures explained only in letters and tears, never followed by returns. At the center of Selkirk's ascent stood Gabriel Thornfield. He arrived during the winter of 1892, a widower driving a single wagon from Ohio, his 7 daughters huddled beside him. His wife had died of pneumonia on the journey west. The sight of that broken family facing the Montana cold stirred sympathy, and Gabriel quickly became known as a hard-working merchant and a devoted father. Within 2 years, his modest store expanded into the largest commercial enterprise for miles. He secured exclusive mining contracts, forged supply lines to Chicago and San Francisco, and somehow obtained the capital to build a 3-story Victorian mansion on Maple Street. Its stained glass windows and elaborate trim stood as both a monument to success and a promise to his daughters that they would want for nothing. The Thornfield sisters became woven into the life of Selkirk. Margaret, the eldest, was a teacher whose sharp mind and quiet authority transformed the one-room schoolhouse. Catherine painted the land itself, capturing mountains and faces with equal tenderness. The twins, Elena and Elizabeth, built a seamstress shop that doubled as a refuge for women navigating frontier life. Sarah's voice filled the Methodist church and carried comfort into homes broken by accident and loss. Grace, brilliant with numbers, balanced her father's books with uncanny precision. And Rebecca, still a child, gave joy freely, reading to younger children, laughing easily, believing without reservation in the goodness of others. Yet admiration curdled into unease. By the summer of 1899, Gabriel began hosting private meetings with well-dressed men who arrived by evening train and left before dawn. Conversations took place behind closed doors. Money moved quietly. Questions followed him through town. The nation itself was restless. The Depression of 1893 still echoed through shuttered banks and labor unrest. Miners organized. Strikes flared. The Western Federation of Miners gained strength, and violence was never far behind. Railroads brought wealth and predators. Confidence men, speculators, and criminal enterprises followed the tracks west, exploiting isolation and weak law enforcement. October 12th dawned clear and cold. Maple leaves burned gold and red in the sunlight. Gabriel opened his store at 7, as always. The sisters followed their routines, but something was off. Small disturbances that would only gain meaning later. Margaret arrived at the schoolhouse distracted, her appearance slightly careless. Catherine painted in the garden, but paced more than she worked, staring toward the train station. The twins whispered urgently in their shop, hands trembling over fabric. Sarah faltered during hymns, gaze fixed on the street outside the church windows. Grace miscalculated simple sums, her father glancing at her with concern. Rebecca asked the housekeeper strange questions about leaving home, about happiness elsewhere. By afternoon, the unease had sharpened. Dr. Samuel Porter encountered all 7 sisters walking together toward the train depot, silent, pale, moving with rigid determination. When he called out, only Rebecca turned. The fear in her eyes struck him like ice. He would later say it felt like a plea she was forbidden to voice. That night, at 9:15, telegraph clerk Timothy Fletcher saw them again. They stood beneath a street lamp outside his office, aligned in a perfect row, facing the station. They wore their finest dresses, hair carefully arranged, jewelry chosen with intention. They looked prepared, not for celebration, but for something endured. Their faces held resignation and fear. 10 minutes later, they were gone, and Selkirk would never be the same. The hours that followed the sisters' disappearance remain the most troubling, not because of what was seen, but because of what was not. The only person inside the Thornfield home that night was Gabriel himself, and his account, repeated many times over the years, would slowly unravel under scrutiny. According to his statement, Gabriel retired to his study shortly after 10 o'clock to review business correspondence delivered by the afternoon train. He claimed to have worked for roughly 90 minutes, reading letters and updating ledgers in a routine so familiar he could perform it without thought. At precisely 11:30, he said, he secured the house, offered a brief prayer in the small chapel room, and went to bed. He heard nothing, saw nothing, slept undisturbed. Mrs. Caldwell, the housekeeper, left the house at exactly 10, as she always did. Her testimony would later haunt investigators. She spoke of an unnatural stillness settling over the mansion that evening. No laughter, no footsteps above, no murmured conversations drifting down the stairwell. Even the house itself seemed subdued, as though the walls were holding their breath. More disturbing was what had not been done. The sisters had not prepared for the next day. No clothing laid out, no materials set aside. The small habits that shaped their daily lives were absent, abandoned as if tomorrow no longer mattered. Gabriel insisted he noticed nothing unusual, but what happened between 11:30 and dawn would defy every explanation he offered. At first light on October 13th, Mrs. Caldwell returned. The front door was locked, exactly as she had left it. Inside, the silence was so complete it felt oppressive. The kitchen showed no trace of the sisters' customary late evening tea. Cups untouched, kettle cold. She climbed the stairs. Margaret's room appeared untouched by sleep. The bed was made with mathematical precision. The nightgown hung where it always did. Yet Mrs. Caldwell sensed immediately that something was wrong. Books had been removed and replaced incorrectly. Papers examined and restacked by unfamiliar hands. Order without understanding. Catherine's room told a different, but equally unsettling story. Her creative chaos, canvases, brushes, unfinished work, had been erased. Everything cleaned, arranged, controlled. A stranger's idea of neatness imposed upon a soul that never lived that way. The twins' shared bedroom revealed the truth more clearly. Drawers opened, contents examined, items replaced, but not quite right. The symmetry they always maintained had been attempted, but imperfectly, like an imitation by someone who knew what order should look like, but not how it was lived. On the third floor, Sarah's, Grace's, and Rebecca's rooms confirmed the pattern. 7 beds unslept in, 7 nightgowns untouched, 7 lives interrupted. Mrs. Caldwell's scream shattered the morning stillness, drawing neighbors from their homes. Gabriel ran through the house, calling their names, clinging to the hope of misunderstanding. But each room offered only silence and evidence of intrusion without theft. Sheriff William Harding arrived quickly, and from the moment he stepped inside, he understood this was unlike anything he had faced. Every door and window was locked, no signs of forced entry, no tracks in the soft earth outside, despite the frost that should have preserved them perfectly. The house had been sealed, and yet it had been searched. Harding canvassed Selkirk, and what emerged was a mosaic of unease. Well-dressed strangers on evening trains, private meetings, coded telegrams sent late at night. Timothy Fletcher confirmed an unusual volume of messages, composed of meaningless strings of letters and numbers, sent to Chicago, New York, San Francisco. Many were signed by Gabriel Thornfield. The bank president, Charles Whitman, reluctantly revealed troubling financial patterns. Large withdrawals of gold coins following the strangers' visits. Deposits and investments that far exceeded what a general store should generate. Payments arriving from Eastern sources with no clear explanation. As weeks passed, the case drew national attention. Federal Inspector Marcus Reed arrived, bringing with him the weight of authority and experience in dismantling criminal organizations that thrived in shadows. His investigation peeled back layers Selkirk had never wanted to see. Gabriel's records revealed connections to the Rocky Mountain Development Company, a name that appeared legitimate, yet vanished into a web of shell corporations and proxy agents. The company had been acquiring mineral rights across the West, greased by bribery and silence. Gabriel's wealth traced back to them. As winter closed in, Selkirk changed. Families left. Newcomers arrived who asked no questions. Gabriel sold his store, withdrew from public life, and built 7 marble headstones in the cemetery. Names carved, dates etched, bodies absent. By 1901, the town had shed its memory like a skin. Then, in 1922, in Chicago, the past clawed its way back. During the demolition of an abandoned warehouse, workers uncovered a hidden room sealed behind false walls. Inside were filing cabinets, storage boxes, and artifacts documenting decades of crime. Among them were 7 photographs, the Thornfield sisters. The images were taken years after their disappearance. Margaret older, burdened, Catherine elegant but hollow-eyed. The twins photographed separately, Sarah composed yet desolate, Grace professional, extinguished, Rebecca grown but stripped of joy. Detective John Sullivan recognized the truth immediately. These were not mementos, they were records. The archive belonged to an organization offering what it called domestic placement services, a euphemism for human trafficking. For decades, they had targeted frontier families, exploiting isolation, poverty, and hope. They posed as employment agents, matrimony brokers, benefactors of opportunity. Their methods were meticulous. Families were studied, vulnerabilities identified, offers tailored. Once entangled financially or socially, withdrawal became impossible. Gabriel Thornfield had been involved since 1893. Correspondence revealed him as a local agent, at first minor, then indispensable. His prosperity was built on cooperation. When scrutiny grew dangerous, the organization demanded final payment. His daughters. His letters revealed desperation, bargaining, terror. He offered money. Other families, exile, all refused. Only the surrender of the 7 sisters would satisfy the debt. The final letters showed a man who believed resistance meant annihilation, not just for himself, but for Selkirk. He clung to assurances that his daughters would be treated well, married advantageously, safe. They were lies, carefully worded. When the archive's revelations became public, federal investigations exploded outward. Raids followed. Corruption surfaced in courts, law enforcement, politics. Over 300 young women were identified as victims between 1885 and 1910. In Selkirk, officials were implicated, payments uncovered, silence purchased. The cemetery headstones revealed their final secret. The dates carved were not deaths, but marriages. Gabriel had known, marked them, hidden the truth in stone. His suicide note, found years later in Denver, confessed his guilt and his cowardice. The organization was not dismantled, it had evolved. And justice, when it came, arrived too late for many. The final reckoning began in the spring of 1922, when federal authorities, armed with evidence pulled from the Chicago warehouse and Gabriel Thornfield's long-buried correspondence, launched a coordinated series of raids across 12 states. More than 200 agents moved at once, striking offices, private homes, boarding houses, and institutions that had worn the masks of respectability for decades. What they uncovered exceeded even their worst expectations. Women were liberated from situations described in records with chilling neutrality: placements, arrangements, domestic transfers. In reality, they were lives halted and redirected by force. Alongside these rescues came ledgers, contracts, and personal files that documented the fates of hundreds who had vanished quietly from frontier towns. Among them, at last, were complete records of the Thornfield sisters. Margaret Thornfield had been sent to Cleveland. There, she was forced into marriage with Harrison Pembroke, a steel magnate who had requested a bride of intellect and refinement. The arrangement was presented as opportunity, even honor. Instead, Margaret became a possession, valued for her mind only insofar as it enhanced Pembroke's social standing. She bore 3 children, never allowed to reveal her name or past. To them, she was an orphan. To the world, she was invisible. Yet she endured. In secret, Margaret documented everything: names, dates, methods. Her journals, hidden for years, would become some of the most important evidence recovered during the raids. When investigators found her living as Mary Patterson, closely monitored and carefully contained, she did not hesitate. She gave them everything. Catherine's fate led her to Milwaukee. Married to Augustus Richardson, an art collector, she was forced to create paintings he sold under his own name. Her isolation was deliberate. No exhibitions, no community, only endless production. Investigators later stood in Richardson's mansion before canvases of extraordinary beauty, each one heavy with sorrow. Catherine survived by pouring grief into pigment, her art becoming both prison and witness. The twins were separated by design. Elena was taken to St. Louis. The shock of separation broke her swiftly. Within months, she suffered a profound psychological collapse, her sense of self fractured by grief and captivity. Elizabeth was sent to Chicago, married to a banker who valued her competence but denied her humanity. Both were told the other had died. It was a lie calculated to extinguish hope. Sarah's story ended sooner than the rest. Taken to Detroit and married to Reverend Jonathan Morrison, she was displayed as proof of his virtue. Her voice and devotion used to elevate his reputation. Behind closed doors, she endured years of abuse. She died in 1905, officially of pneumonia. Investigators later concluded her body had simply been worn down, her illness hastened by neglect. Morrison sought another wife within months. Grace's brilliance made her dangerous. Placed with Theodore Blackstone in Chicago, she was forced to manage complex financial operations tied directly to the trafficking network. She resisted where she could, introducing small errors, attempting sabotage. When discovered, she was punished. Her health deteriorated. She died in childbirth in 1909, denied proper care by a man who saw her only as an instrument. Rebecca never reached placement. Too young, she was held for years, moved from location to location like surplus inventory. Stability was denied her, affection forbidden. By the time she was old enough to be considered useful, tuberculosis had taken hold. She died in 1907 in a facility meant to warehouse the unwanted. The trials that followed shook the nation. Marcus Peaton, the architect of the network, was arrested in his Chicago mansion. Brilliant, composed, and utterly without remorse, he described his enterprise as efficient and necessary. He spoke of frontier women as commodities refined by hardship, desirable for their resilience. His testimony sickened the courtroom. 17 of his closest associates were convicted. Many more escaped justice, protected by influence, erased by time, or buried with the evidence they took to their graves. When offered the chance to testify, the surviving Thornfield sisters faced impossible choices. Margaret stepped forward. At 49, she stood before the court and spoke with the same clarity that once filled a schoolhouse in Selkirk. She named names. She described systems. She gave voice to those who could not. Her testimony helped shape new legal precedents and forced the country to confront truths it had long ignored. Catherine and Elizabeth chose silence. They had built fragile lives atop unbearable foundations. Children who knew nothing of Selkirk. Families who depended on their continued anonymity. Investigators honored their decision. Justice, they understood, could not demand infinite sacrifice. Selkirk itself did not survive the truth intact. Families left, buildings emptied. The Thornfield mansion was demolished in 1925. The ground left bare. The 7 headstones were replaced with a single monument, funded by quiet contributions from across Montana. It bore no dates, only acknowledgement. The case reshaped American law. Oversight tightened, interstate cooperation improved, employment agencies and matrimonial services were scrutinized. But the deeper lesson cut harder. The Thornfield tragedy revealed how easily hope could be weaponized, how ambition, isolation, and silence could be turned into tools. It showed that progress, when divorced from morality, becomes something predatory. Gabriel Thornfield believed he was securing his daughter's futures. Instead, he delivered them into darkness. His wealth bought comfort for a time, but the cost was everything he loved. His failure was not only personal, it was communal, national, systemic. And yet, even within that darkness, something endured. Margaret's voice, Catherine's art, Elizabeth's survival, the quiet insistence that truth, no matter how late, still matters. The Seven Sisters of Selkirk were not lost to history. They were taken by it, caught in the machinery of an era that measured worth in profit and silence. Their story remains a warning, whispered through records and stone, reminding us that civilization is not defined by what it builds, but by whom it chooses to protect. And in the quiet spaces between progress and ambition, the past is still listening.